I overheard my future mother-in-law mocking me in front of her friends, bragging that she had landed a simple-minded son-in-law and was now set for life. I made it clear to her that she would no longer be able to leech off me. I'm 32 years old, and next month, I'm getting married to my fiancée, Deborah, who is 31. We've been together for 2 years, and I proposed to her just a month ago. I'm head over heels in love with this incredible woman and can't wait to spend the rest of my life with her. We grew up in completely different circumstances. I come from a working-class family and am the middle child of 3. My parents always had to work hard, living paycheck to paycheck. Deborah, on the other hand, was raised in a much wealthier family. Her father was a successful businessman who could provide her with everything she needed. She was always surrounded by affluent peers who threw extravagant parties and events. I worked hard to get into college and eventually secured a job at a prestigious company. My parents were proud of what I had achieved, knowing I had never asked them for financial support. I first met Deborah at a party hosted by a mutual friend. Despite our different backgrounds, we felt an instant connection. We started dating, getting to know each other, and falling more in love every day. When our relationship became serious, Deborah invited me to a family dinner to formally introduce me to her parents. That was when I first met her father, John, a successful businessman, and her mother, Maggie, who was a housewife. John seemed to appreciate my hard work and accomplishments, but Maggie was the complete opposite. She clearly didn't like me. It was obvious that she looked down on my background and believed I didn't meet her expectations for the perfect son-in-law. Her disapproval was so blatant that it was painful to witness. She didn't hold back in making it clear that, in her opinion, her only child deserved someone better. She would frequently interrupt me during conversations, and her disapproving looks spoke louder than words, creating an uncomfortable atmosphere. Meanwhile, my parents welcomed Deborah with open arms. They were thrilled to have her in the family, and my brothers instantly adored her. They even joked that she still had time to run away from me. It was heartwarming to see my family support and embrace our relationship. Over time, I made efforts to build a better relationship with Maggie, hoping to earn her approval. I understood that she might need time to come to terms with our different social backgrounds. However, our interactions remained tense, and I could feel that her disapproval never truly went away. Despite this, Deborah and I focused on building our own life together, filled with love, understanding, and shared dreams. We were determined to protect our relationship despite family differences, hoping that eventually Maggie would accept and even grow to love me. A year ago, John suddenly passed away from a heart attack. Though he had left behind a considerable estate, unexpected debts also surfaced, which needed to be settled. Maggie had to make the difficult decision to sell their house and cars to cover these financial obligations after the bank intervened. After that, she had nowhere to go, so she moved in with us. She has been living with us for 6 months now. I didn't mind having her stay with us, as I understood she was going through a difficult time after losing her husband. I tried to make her stay as comfortable as possible, but Maggie constantly found reasons to complain about the house. For context, Deborah and I had worked hard to buy and renovate our home, and we were proud of it. However, Maggie was never satisfied. She made passive-aggressive remarks about how men shouldn't be in the kitchen or do household chores. At first, I tried not to take it personally and ignored her comments, but over time, her remarks became more offensive and inappropriate. I discussed this with Deborah, and she agreed that her mother's behavior was difficult and hostile. Now, on to the main incident. Recently, I got a promotion at work and wanted to celebrate the occasion with family and friends. We decided to throw a big party and invited our loved ones. My future mother-in-law also invited some of her wealthy friends, whom she hadn't seen in a while, especially after her husband's passing. I trusted Deborah with the party planning, and she handled everything with great care. On the day of the celebration, our house looked amazing. As guests started arriving, Maggie seemed to be enjoying reconnecting with her old friends. Deborah and I were busy welcoming our guests and making sure everyone felt comfortable. As the party reached its peak and people were chatting and having a good time, I noticed that Maggie's behavior was getting worse. She had been drinking too much, and her comments were becoming increasingly inappropriate. She started bragging to her friends about how expensive everything in the house was, especially the decorations and food. It was becoming more and more uncomfortable, and I could see that some of our guests were shocked by her behavior. Deborah and I exchanged worried glances, unsure of what to do. We tried to remain calm, knowing that Maggie had been drinking since the morning. At one point, the alcohol ran out, so I quickly went to the nearest liquor store. When I returned home, I saw Deborah on the lawn in front of the house, enjoying time with our relatives. I handed out drinks to them and went back inside to check on the rest of the guests. At that moment, I heard my mother-in-law's loud laughter as she chatted with her friends. I was about to enter the room when I overheard Maggie talking about my recent job promotion. She went on to say that she had been living in our house for several months for free, simply because I was a naive fool. She laughed, saying that she had finally landed a gullible son-in-law, and pointed out how I had been covering all of her expenses while she lived in my home at no cost. Her words cut deep, and I was stunned. Then, she added that now, with Deborah about to marry me in a few months, she was financially set for life. My emotions were in turmoil. I didn't know what to do. It was painful to realize that such humiliating comments were coming from someone I had considered family, someone I had tried my best to support during a difficult time. I stood in the hallway, feeling a mix of anger, disappointment, and betrayal, debating whether to confront her immediately or wait for a better moment. Then, my future mother-in-law told her friends that, since I came from a low-income family, I would continue working hard for her, so she had nothing to worry about. That was the breaking point. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I decided to walk into the room and put an end to this. With a bottle of wine in my hand, I stepped inside. The room fell into an awkward silence as everyone noticed my unexpected presence. Maggie's laughter stopped instantly, and her expression shifted from surprise to a mix of discomfort and anxiety. She was clearly worried that I had overheard her conversation. Pouring wine for everyone and placing the bottle on the table, I turned to Maggie and began to speak. Maggie, I couldn't help but overhear your conversation with your friends. I stood here for a good 5 minutes, listening to how you've been taking advantage of my supposed naivety. I want to remind you that I welcomed you into my home with open arms and tried to support you through a difficult time, especially after you lost your husband. However, making such insulting remarks about me in front of our family and friends, laughing at my expense, is completely unacceptable. A heavy silence filled the room. I could see that Maggie was stunned by the bluntness of my words, and her friends looked just as uncomfortable. As the tension peaked, my fiancé walked into the room with a confused expression, trying to understand what was happening. I stood in the center of the room, now in Deborah's presence, and continued explaining what her mother had been saying about me to her friends. Deborah's eyes widened in shock as she tried to process the seriousness of the situation. Maggie's face shifted from shock to embarrassment. I realized then that I couldn't forgive her for the way she spoke about me. I demanded that Maggie leave my home immediately. Her eyes widened in panic, and she began to protest, realizing that she had nowhere else to go. Deborah remained silent, fully aware of how humiliated I felt because of her mother's behavior. But I stood firm in my decision, making it clear that I would no longer allow my future mother-in-law to live with us. I even suggested that she find a place to stay with one of her wealthy friends, those same friends who had just been laughing at my expense. Maggie looked around the room desperately, but her friends avoided making eye contact with her. I couldn't help but smirk at the situation. My patience had run out, and I refused to be manipulated any longer. At that tense moment, Deborah, visibly shaken, finally spoke. She turned to her mother with a look of disappointment and determination. Mom, your behavior today has put us in an incredibly awkward position. We have always tried to support you, but the way you treated my fiancé is unacceptable. Maggie, caught between her daughter's disapproval and her own shameful actions, began to realize the gravity of the situation. She had no way out and attempted to apologize, but I didn't want to hear another word from her. Still boiling with anger and disappointment, I left the room. The party quickly came to an end, and my future mother-in-law ended up leaving to stay with a relative. After this incident, I started receiving messages with mixed reactions. Most guests supported my decision to stand up for myself, but some of Deborah's relatives argued that I was wrong to humiliate her mother in front of everyone. My parents, who had been at the party, fully supported me and took my side. This situation created a rift between our families, and the divided opinions only added to the tension. So, I decided to write here to get an objective opinion. Was I wrong to call out my future mother-in-law in front of everyone after hearing how she mocked me? Was I wrong to make it clear that I would no longer allow her to leech off me? And now, let's move on to an update. Update 1. Thank you all for your feedback on my previous post. Many of you pointed out that this incident should be a major red flag regarding the family I'm about to marry into. Several people also advised me to consider signing a prenuptial agreement with my fiancé before the wedding, something I hadn't even thought about before. After everything that happened, I am seriously considering this option. That night, after the party ended, Deborah and I had a long discussion about what had transpired. Even though she was fully on my side, it was hard to deny that my trust had been shaken. It wasn't her fault, but I was concerned about her family and how easily they could manipulate me in the future. Many people pointed out that Maggie's passive-aggressive and cutting remarks over the past few months could be considered a form of emotional abuse, and now, I'm starting to see it too. I no longer want her to be a part of my life. 2 days after Maggie left, she called Deborah, but she didn't answer. Then, Maggie sent me an angry message that read, "Adam, are you happy now that you've turned my daughter against me? I already lost my husband, and now, because of you, I'm losing my daughter too. Yes, I used you, but isn't that what a son-in-law is supposed to do, cover his future mother-in-law's expenses? You could have bought me a new house when I lost mine, but instead, you forced me to live with you. You have enough money to support my daughter, so it wouldn't have been a big deal to take care of me too." Her message infuriated me. It was clear that she felt no remorse for the humiliating comments she had made about me in front of her friends. I showed the message to Deborah, and she immediately assured me that she would handle the situation. She also suggested that I block her mother's number. What happens next remains uncertain, but I am emotionally drained. Maggie's constant hostility toward me, with no valid reason, combined with her unreasonable financial expectations, has exhausted me. A few days later, Deborah finally reached out to her mother. She firmly told Maggie that she had crossed the line this time. Deborah offered to help her find suitable housing, but made it clear that living with us was no longer an option. Maggie's reaction fluctuated between anger and pleading. She continued to blame me for ruining their family and causing her more pain during an already difficult time in her life. Fortunately, I had blocked her number, so she couldn't contact me directly. As our wedding approached, I shared my thoughts and fears with Deborah, and she took them surprisingly well. My fiancé acknowledged that my concerns were valid and reassured me that she was willing to sign a prenuptial agreement so I wouldn't feel anxious or pressured. I was taken aback by her understanding and couldn't shake off the guilt I felt for having negative thoughts about her, thoughts that were solely caused by her mother's actions. After that conversation, I felt much better. We started getting back to normal, but then, a few days later, Maggie unexpectedly showed up at our doorstep without any warning. I was home alone when I heard the doorbell ring. When I opened the door, she was standing there, ready to unleash her anger on me. As I invited her inside and offered her a seat, she immediately launched into accusations, blaming me for destroying her relationship with her daughter forever. Her words were filled with disappointment and bitterness. "Do you think you can control everything?" she shouted. "You took my daughter away from me, and now you're trying to cut me out of her life completely. She's my family too, and you don't get to dictate what we do." As the argument escalated, her accusations became more personal and sharp. She claimed I was isolating her from Deborah and insisted she had every right to live with her daughter. Taking a deep breath, I tried to stay calm and responded, "Maggie, this isn't about pushing you away. It's about maintaining peace and well-being in our family. Your actions and words have made it difficult to have a healthy environment. I'm not trying to isolate you, I'm setting boundaries. This isn't about control, it's about protecting our relationship." At that moment, thankfully, Deborah returned from the store. I sighed in relief, knowing she could handle the situation better. She was visibly shocked to see her mother in our house. Quickly walking up to me, she asked if everything was okay. Her eyes were filled with concern. I nodded, feeling an odd sense of reassurance just by having her there. Maggie, now turning her attention to her daughter, accused me of trying to control her life. She insisted that she would not allow me to kick her out and that she planned to live with us since her daughter would be living here too. She also accused me of trying to destroy their family after the death of her husband. Deborah, now clearly frustrated, firmly explained to her mother that after everything she had said about me, she couldn't expect me to just forget about it. She reminded Maggie that she had never even apologized for her harsh words spoken in front of our guests at the party I had hosted in my own home. Deborah reiterated that her mother had no right to live in my house just because Deborah was marrying me. Maggie didn't like that her daughter was siding with me, and it only seemed to fuel her anger. The tension in the room was unbearable, and I didn't want the situation to spiral further. So, I told Maggie that she needed to leave immediately, or I would have no choice but to call the police. Her expression was a mix of shock and defiance, but luckily, she decided to leave. After this incident, I started seriously considering taking a break from my relationship with Deborah and her family. I love her deeply, but I don't want to be stuck in a toxic environment forever. I think I need time to reevaluate our future. Update 2. It has been 4 months since my last update, and I am happy to share that Deborah and I are now happily married. Our wedding day went off without a hitch, and it was a beautiful celebration of our love and commitment to each other. We were surrounded by our closest friends and family, and the day was filled with joy and unforgettable memories. I know that last time I mentioned having doubts about the wedding, but after spending time reflecting on everything, I realized that Deborah is nothing like her mother. As we had discussed before the wedding, Deborah signed a prenuptial agreement, which gave us both peace of mind. This decision reassured us that our relationship is built on trust, respect, and mutual understanding. One noticeable absence on our special day was my mother-in-law, Maggie. We invited her because I didn't want my wife to feel like she couldn't have her only living parent at her wedding. However, Maggie chose not to come. Her anger and resentment toward me over our past conflicts, which ultimately led to her moving out of our home, outweighed everything else. I felt sad for Deborah, who had to go through such an important day without her mother. Nevertheless, our wedding was filled with love and happiness. We were grateful for the support of our loved ones, who celebrated the beginning of our married life with us. Update 3. Married life has been wonderful. Deborah and I have been enjoying every moment together, finding joy in the little things: lazy Sunday breakfasts in bed, evenings spent reading together, and simply building our future as a couple. Our love continues to grow, and we have become an even stronger team. We naturally settled into our shared responsibilities as a married couple, and life has been smooth. Recently, I made a significant step toward personal growth and family healing. Thanks to the advice of many of you, I decided to start therapy. Psychotherapy has helped me better understand myself, express my thoughts more clearly, and navigate family dynamics. It has allowed me to process emotional wounds and challenges, especially regarding my relationship with my mother-in-law. With the help of my therapist, I learned how to communicate more effectively with my wife and work on strengthening our marriage. When I felt ready, Deborah and I attempted to reconnect with Maggie. It was an awkward step, but I knew how much Deborah loved her mother, and I didn't want her to lose that relationship. We decided to invite Maggie over for dinner to talk things through. Since the incident, Maggie had been staying with various relatives. When Deborah first extended the invitation, Maggie was surprised. She seemed hesitant, but also interested in the opportunity to reconnect with her daughter. She came to our home, and we started with casual conversations about how things had been going. Deborah was the first to express her desire to establish a healthier relationship between me and Maggie. She shared how much she loved us both and how she wished we could find common ground. Hearing this, Maggie gradually admitted that her actions had been driven by feelings of loss and uncertainty after her husband's passing. She acknowledged that those emotions had clouded her judgment when it came to me. Then, she sincerely apologized for her behavior and admitted that she hadn't realized how deeply she had hurt me. I could tell that her apology was genuine. From there, we discussed steps we could take to rebuild our relationship. It was an emotional and honest conversation, filled with tears and heartfelt apologies. Deborah played a key role in this process, acting as a bridge between me and her mother. By the end of the evening, as we sat down to a wonderful dinner, there was a sense of relief and optimism in the room. While the wounds of the past hadn't completely healed, a foundation for reconciliation had been laid. Since that night, we have continued to meet Maggie at family gatherings, and now there is no awkwardness between us. Our relationship has gradually improved. While I don't think I will ever feel comfortable enough for her to live with us again, I remain patient and understand that forgiveness takes time. So, what do you think about this entire situation? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. As for my personal opinion, I believe I was absolutely right in standing up for myself. My mother-in-law should have made an effort to build a good relationship with me from the start, instead of escalating the situation to such an extreme. Even if she believed she was in the right, A simple apology could have prevented so much unnecessary conflict and stress.